For the first time since I was old enough to leave the nursery, I didn't dine in the great hall. I knew my father wouldn't want to see me, and I didn't trust myself not to enrage him still further. I told Jeanette that my head hurt and I didn't feel well, and a page was dispatched to bring dinner to my chambers. Jeanette put her gentle hand on my forehead and then, after holding it there for a moment, smiled in relief. "You're not feverish," she said. I sighed. "That's because I'm not actually sick," I said. "I just want to be alone." But she made no move to leave. "Really alone," I said. Jeanette stood up reluctantly. "Are you sure you don't want me to stay with you?" The page entered with a bow, bringing a tray of pheasant, roasted fennel, and honey wine, which he set on a carved table near the flickering flame. "I'm sure," I said. Jeanette ducked her head. "I understand, Princess. I'll look in on you later," she said. She motioned the page, and then the door closed softly behind them. Ignoring the dinner, I sat on the sheepskin in front of the fireplace with my legs crisscrossed as if I were a little girl. I opened my book of demons and monsters, admiring for the 10,000th time the richly detailed illustrations of the mythical beings that had thrilled and terrified me since I was old enough to turn the pages. Behold, the terrors of dreams and darkness, these ancient creatures of depthless night. I knew every beast by heart. Here was Balor, demigod of drought and blight, whose single giant eye could burn everything around it to dust. On the next page was the imposing centaur, with the head and torso of a man and the body of a stallion, whose arms could crush men's bones like twigs. The book's margins featured smaller imaginary creatures. The Gwilgi, a black-faced dog whose howls foretold the death of whomever heard them, and the birds of Rhiannon, whose song woke the dead. If the birds of Rhiannon truly existed, would I be brave enough to summon one? Would I wake my poor mother from her sleep of 17 years? I would if I could, without a moment's hesitation. The guilt of her death had weighed on me my whole life. If it weren't for me, she'd still be alive. Maybe this was another reason I'd asked my father to stop his war raids. One killer in the family was enough. But now our enemies approached us. Was I to be responsible for the deaths of our knights next? What of our servants, should the castle be breached? What of the villagers dying of the sleep? And not least of all, there was the poor wretched boy who lay bloody and beaten in a cell 100 feet below me. His fate was my fault too. I put my face in my hands. I hadn't exactly lied to Jeanette at first. I didn't feel well. But it was my heart, not my head, that ached. Then I looked up at the rich dinner that had been prepared for me. It could have had 6 villagers. It was probably more food than Finna's family ate in a week. In what world was that fair? I'd read about monks of old fasting and penance, and I decided that I would fast tonight too. For my mother, for Raphael, for the villagers and the soldiers and everyone else who had ever suffered. For Rosa. I sent for the page and bid him take the food away. I only hoped he would get some of it. Then I turned my attention back to the book, which had been a comfort to me more times than I could count. This was ironic, of course, because its characters were the creatures of nightmares. If they'd ever existed, they would not be my confidants and friends. But comfort me they did somehow. I turned from the real horror of Ares, of sickness and war and dungeons, to the imaginary horror of these mythical creatures. Here was the Tatzel worm, whose green-eyed, cat-like face used to haunt my dreams. Its long, slithering body was scaled as a snake's, and venom dripped from its fangs. Even stranger were the Blimy, headless men with eyes on their shoulders and hideous mouths on their broad, bare chests. And finally, there was Rapier, the Destroyer, who left his throne of skulls to walk among the human world. A demon with a prince's face, he killed for profit and pleasure alike, and death followed him wherever he went, obedient as a dog. Those were terrible creatures indeed, but they were not real, whereas I, a pretty princess perfumed and bedecked in jewels, had been a true force of destruction. It was ironic indeed.